Flinders Worthy here, with tales old and new from near and far, for here and now. And the story I'm going to tell you today is a local tale, and it concerns a whole race of people. Now, you will find stories about these people in myths and legends from all over the world. Once upon a time, a long time ago, Lincolnshire looked very different to the way that it looks nowadays. It was a land of bogs and fens. The coastline was entirely waterlogged. It was more sea than land, mile after mile after mile of misty marshes. Now, there were a few scattered settlements where people lived and worked, but they were not alone, for there were other inhabitants who lived in the marshes, as well as the fisher folk, the farmers, and the occasional traveller. And these people were known as the Tiddy people. Tiddy. Now, it's a strange word, isn't it? It is believed that in the local dialect, Tiddy means tiny, small, little. But some think that Tiddy is a word for the sea tide. Now, we don't agree on that, but people do agree on this. The Tiddy people were different. To start off with, they were tiny. They're about the length of your arm. They had very thin arms and legs, but they had very large hands, feet, and heads. The Tiddy people were similar to us in many ways. They were neither particularly good nor particularly bad. They could be kind sometimes and cruel the next. Chief and most important amongst the Tiddy people was their king, the Tiddy Munn. Now, the Tiddy Munn was about 2 feet tall. He had a long grey beard, grey hair, and he wore a grey robe with a grey cloak, which meant that in the misty marshes it was often very, very difficult to spot him. The Tiddy Munn looked over the marshes and protected his people. The local farmers and the fisher folk and the Tiddy people got on well enough. The farmers believed that the Tiddy people helped them by encouraging the crops to grow in the spring. Occasionally, a Tiddy person would enter a farmhouse. They would go and sit themselves by the fire and get a warm. Now, if this was to happen to you, you should take it as a sign of honour that you have been accepted thus. But you would also know that within a few short days, a piece of very good luck would come your way. Now, as for the Tiddy man himself, it was held by the fisher folk and the farmers that he had supernatural powers over the water, and that he could command them to either rise or fall. So, any time the waters rose and the sea started to look as if it might impinge upon the farmhouses, the local people would go outside and they would cry out this rhyme: Tiddy man, wiat a name, the water's thruff, which is as much as to say, Tiddy man, without a name, the water's through. They would then wait and listen very, very carefully to see if they could hear the cry of the peewit, which is a marsh bird. If they heard the cry of the peewit, they knew that that meant that the Tiddy man had heard them, and the waters would soon start to subside. However, sometimes the Tiddy man chose to take revenge on the local people, especially if he thought they had done his people some bad turn or another. Often, strangers, travellers walking out in the marshes would disappear. Occasionally, a boat full of fishermen would never be seen again. And if this happened, it was generally held that it was the Tiddy Munn who had taken them. Now, I suppose that things would have gone on well enough. Unfortunately, change came to the Fens. In the 17th century, by order of King Charles, Dutch engineers were employed to drain the Fens to make farmland. And of course, they were draining the very place where the Tiddy people lived. Perhaps then it was not surprising that a few of these Dutch engineers disappeared, strangely. And when they did, you can guess who got the blame. The Tiddy Munn. It didn't stop the draining continuing, though, and after a while, something else happened. The Tiddy Munn put a curse on the whole of the Fens. Livestock, farm animals, started to fall ill and die. Crops withered in the fields. Farmhouses started to fall down mysteriously. Everybody knew that it was the Tiddy Man's work. But what to do? Well, the draining continued. So the Tiddy Munn sent a terrible sickness to afflict the Fens. People fell ill. But most especially, this sickness affected children. Well, the people knew what had to be done. If you are faced with a curse, you must find some way of making it stop. Now, between you and me, traditionally the best way to lift a curse is to make an offering. And so that is exactly what the local farmers and fisherfolk did. They went out to the fields that had been freshly drained with a cup of water, which they then poured onto the ground, whilst reciting this rhyme. Tiddy man, without a name, here's water for thee, tack thy spell undone. That is to say, Tiddy man, without a name, here's some water for you, please lift the curse. It seemed to work. The curse went away. Unfortunately, along with the curse going away, so did the Tiddy people. They were seen less and less. There were no more visits to farmhouses to warm by the fire. In fact, it wasn't long until the Tiddy people disappeared altogether. Who knows where they live now? I hope that you enjoyed that story of the Tiddy folk. Don't forget to join us next Saturday when my niece Perdita will be here to entertain you with another tale. In the meantime, ta-ta.